I had heard very mixed things, but this is the most divisive book that I've ever gone into super confident I was gonna enjoy it. I see him Ken Liu compared to Guy Gavriel K a lot, and my boy Kyle sent me the copy of this book, even though it's a tall paperback, but it was free. It was free for me. It wasn't free for Kyle. But anyways, this is going to be my review for Grace of Kings, a book that I think there's quite a bit to talk about. And basically, I really enjoyed it, but I feel like I have some non-trivial criticisms. And I'm going to talk about it's a very, very unique book. So, let's get into it. First thing I want to mention, I do have an ongoing read-along for this. I know I didn't do a greater job of announcing it. I just mentioned it in like a TBR, my or fall TBR. One of the summer TBR. One of the TBRs. It's got dandelions in the thumbnail with a crown on one of the dandelions. So, there you go. And also I have it on a discussion post. But if you do want to participate in the read-along, it is one book a month. And I have threads open on Daniel Green's Discord under Misc Fantasy and Threads. I've got one on Mike's Discord in the read-along chats for Grace of Kings. I've got one in Alex Nieves' Discord. There's just a buddy read chat. And I've got one on Sarah Reed's Discord in the buddy read chats. And then I'm also talking about it in the Ken Liu chat on Alan's Discord. So if you would like to participate, there is going to be a live show, a spoilery live show at the end. This one is going to be with Jimmy Nuts, who has his own review that I'll link in the description. He liked it even more than me. Okay, that's out of the way. Let's get into this review. Sorry for taking up time, people who don't care about this. So, Grace of Kings is clearly inspired by history. One of the things that made me excited to read this was that there was an absolutely tilting 1-star DNF Goodreads review of it that starts with talking about how this is plagiarism, and it says like it plagiarized this person, and so it sounds like it plagiarized another fantasy series, and then you get like 3 paragraphs into the review and you learn like, oh, it plagiarized history, and it's like, that's not the same thing, folks. Like, historical fiction's its entire genre where you're allowed to plagiarize real life. It's totally acceptable. Have you heard of memoirs? Or historical fiction? Or Guy Gavriel K? Or A Song of Ice and Fire? Like, which was less than this. But still, I am by no means an expert on Chinese history, so I don't actually know what period of time this is plagiarizing from. I think it's like, might be around the Three Kingdoms time. I don't know. If you want, you can go see that review, and I'm sure that person will tell you. Anyway, so yeah, it follows a realm that used to be like 7 distinct realms that, according to like their religion, it was important that they had 7 realms, and then one dude came around and he did a little conquering and now is the ruler. And the first thing, the most important actually part of this book is not the plot, it is the style. Because I and others throw around the word sweeping for fantasy books. It's a sweeping epic, and I am now restricting my use of the word because Grace of Kings has elevated my threshold for what's considered sweeping. Because no, this is sweeping. This is what it feels like to me. There's a lot of fantasy series where there's like a beginning trilogy or quartet, and then there's like with the conclusion, and then there's a time gap that happens, and then there's like another follow-up series. You have First Law, Age of Madness, Red Rising, Dark Age trilogy. I haven't read the books, but I know this is a thing with Scott Baker as well. It's like Prince of Nothing and then like Second Apocalypse. And what you may notice, if you look at the Goodreads reviews, is that the second series always has higher ratings. So what Ken Liu has done is he has taken the entire plot of a first series that probably has more content than at least the first, like more things that happen, more narrative beats than the First Law trilogy or the Red Rising trilogy, and he has put it in one book. If I see someone say that this book was too long, I will send a 4-pupiled, 8-foot-tall man to beat you up. Because, like, it happens a lot where I really like a book and then people are like, it's way too long. And I'm like, I liked it at length. I think I'd like it less if it was shorter. This book is not too long. This, and I am not exaggerating, and I'm not saying this makes it better or worse, but just like factually, if you count narrative beats, I would be willing to bet this book has more stuff happen in it than the entirety of A Song of Ice and Fire. Not Fire and Blood, the 5 A Song of Ice and Fire books. Or the first 4 Stormlight books. It's 600 pages. That's how much stuff happens. Like, if you were to look at the outline for this book, and you were told, hey, you have to predict how long this is, you'd be like, oh, that's like a 7-book series. Like, there's a climax, 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 and then there's the end of the series. And another crazy thing, like, because it kind of fits like that, it works pretty well like standalone. Like, it's not cliffhangery at all. You could, I feel like, take a pretty big break after Grace of Kings. Also, from what I've told, like, the next 3 books are stylistically, like, very different. They're much less sweeping. They're much more, like, intimately focused on the characters. And you would expect, being that sweeping, to have some major pros and some major cons. And I think this book has all the major pros and all the major cons. And the major pros is what I discussed. An absurd amount of stuff happens. If you look, I tend to react to books on Discord, and I had an obscene amount of reactions to this book. And I wasn't just doing it because it was a read-along. It's just, like, a lot of narratively significant stuff happened. Where usually, and I ended up posting less, like, reactions for the second half. That wasn't because there were less moments. I was just, like, I was reading it pretty fast. Like, it was one more chapter in me, and I was just, like, you know, I was checking my phone infrequently enough that I had no idea if it was 1 a.m. or 3 a.m. You know, when that happens, that means the book's good. And it has an incredible high density of narratively significant moments. And importantly, those narratively significant moments are interesting. It's not just random stuff happening. It actually, in totality, tells an extremely cohesive narrative. And I think I can't think of any parts that, like, weren't important to that cohesive narrative. And also, something I would like to say is this is a dark book. I was not aware that it was going to be this dark, and before all the people who have reviewed this yelled at me, I have been deliberately not reading stuff, or, like, I've been ignoring comments about the series because I already knew I was going to read it. Like, hey Jimmy, if you're watching this is, like, the only review of yours I haven't watched. Because I got, like, 4 minutes in, and I'm like, I mean, I know I'm going to read this. Like, I don't need to, I want to go in blind. So, yeah. So, same thing. I watched very little on the series because it had already, I was sold, I was down, so I didn't want to know much about it. This world is dark. It's one of the, in terms of, like, not in terms of outlook of humanity, because, like, the protagonist, Cooney's, like, a pretty morally good, relatively good person. But in terms of, like, hey, which worlds would suck the most to live in, this is worse than most of them. Like, it's definitely worse than First Law Circle of the World. It's definitely worse than, like, Ice and, like, Westeros. Like, it's messed up stuff happening. And, like, a lot of this, it doesn't POV hop. This book is third-person omniscient. And one of the cons of the book is that a lot of the time, and it's obvious based on how much stuff happens, like, stuff is just kind of exposited to you. I don't know if exposited is a word, but it's told, like the event narrative of the book is told, like, in exposition, almost. The same way it would in, like, a history book, where, you know, the omniscient narrator is like, yeah, and then this person was in charge, and they decided they wanted, like, this really big palace, but they didn't have enough labor, so, you know, they had to, like, have the men whipped because they were too slow, and, you know, they did all these terrible things. And that was, like, at times it felt slightly distant, but I do want to save the conflict. I want to talk more about what makes it really good. And I also would like to just give props to Ken Liu for not relying on sexual violence to make, like, a very gritty, like, really dark world. Also, a lot of the darkness, it was like, almost, like, removed, and like, that made it more horrifying. Similar to, like, Book of the New Sun, where, like, they call the people being tortured clients, where it's kind of just, like, it's almost not focusing like in like you don't get the individual stories of like people the horrible stuff is happening to. Like it's just like told matter of factly, and you're just like, holy crap, that was dark, kind of. And yeah, also the world was really interesting. And now I will say, if someone were to tell me they bounced off this book because they found it info dumpy at times, I could not fully blame them. This is one of the books where I thought the when you were told information, I mean, a lot of things were being told by an omniscient narrator, so it just kind of fit. And they tended to be related to the current narrative, except for like very early, because it's the start of the book. You don't really know what the narrative is. And so I found the info stuff like interesting most of the time, but I think if someone were to say they didn't enjoy the book because of the amount of info dumps, I don't know if I could blame them. I didn't really struggle with it myself, except very, like, a little bit early on. Kind of for me, like, the weakest section of this book, it's like 600 pages in my edition, would be pages like 60 to like 190, like 200. And that's where I kind of felt like it felt the least narratively focused, and like the stuff there was important. But it really, there was like one main character who I was at that point like found as a really interesting character, and then for the others, like I was mostly reading to know what happened, while I actually cared about like the group of characters for one point of view, who's Cooney, who's the protagonist. So I think that'd be fair, but it did also, like, for one book, it built a crazy, large, and detailed, and realistic feeling, gritty world. It did an excellent job of that. Also, by the way, I see what people mean, because this cover is better in hindsight. And I think despite the style it had, it did... By the end, I was like, wow, this cast of characters is really good. Like, it built cast of characters that I both was interested in and was like, that I both found interesting and was like emotionally invested in their fate. Also, man, the characters are not safe. This is like, I feel like there's a new level to the meme where, there's a meme out there, and I think it's like, it's like George R. R. Martin being like, oh, look, I killed so many characters, and then there's, like, smug Erickson being like, you're cute, which, by the way, I disagree with. Erickson has more characters. I don't think he actually kills a higher percentage of characters. I disagree with the person who made that meme. But whichever of those two kill more characters, they kill less than Ken Liu. Because, man, they drop him like flies. And there were some characters who were not long for this world, because this covers a lot of events. There's like, as I said, there's enough events for like a 7-book series in this book. And there were a lot of characters who were, we met, and they died in 100 pages, and still I was like, damn, really like that person. I'm kind of sad that they're gone. So he did a very good job at still building characters, despite the slightly more distant style. Okay. And the last thing I want to talk about, two more things I want to talk about, is the prose. The prose, I think, descriptively, like, for scene setting, was pretty efficient, because I feel like I can picture the settings, but I don't think there was actually that much descriptive writing, like, in terms of, like, describing physically what things look like. There's descriptive of what people look like, but not so much of what settings look like in great detail, which I think also a lot of the reason is, if you're in someone's head, you can multitask. You can add characterization details based on how they see the world, and you can tell people what the world looks like. But in third-person omniscient, you're just describing things. And overall, like, I thought his writing was good. I would not say I was blown away by the prose. I thought it was very efficient, and it was done well in third-person omniscient. It POV hops. It's like Dune-style third-person omniscient, where it'll be like, this person thought this, and then it'll move over to another person. It's also very Dune-style in its scheming, in that it doesn't really hide people's motives. It's more Dune-style, where like it kind of tells you what everyone's plan is, and then you get to watch and see what happens, because it's like, you only know what everyone is planning, you don't know like who's going to succeed. And I thought that was done very well. So now that is... And last of all, I'd like to praise the topic tackling of theme. I think Ken Liu in an AMA gave this answer that I've been using because I think it's a fantastic answer, which is someone asked, like, what would you say is the main thematic message of the Dandelion Dynasty? And his answer was, if I could sum this up quickly, I wouldn't have wrote a book series. I would have written an essay. And so I find it very hard to cover all the topics, but I will say I thought it covered with some depth and nuance topics from both like large scale relating to the governance and rulance of like kingdoms or states down to like more personal stuff and like how people handle relationships and stuff like that. And I thought it did that quite well. Okay, now I would like to say I believe I have some non-trivial criticisms. Some of these are stylistic choices that I just dislike, and some of these are, I mean a lot of them are, but they are things that held this back from being a 5-star read for me. And the first one I would like to talk about is the dialogue. The dialogue, this is kind of what it's very like abridged is the word I would almost like to use. Where it feels like if you go talk to someone, there's unnecessary words going on as you're like trying to communicate things. And then, you know, if you were to go to someone else and they were to ask like, oh, what'd you talk about? You would say like what meaning was conveyed, but you would say it like way more efficiently and curtly, and you probably wouldn't repeat yourself and you'd like change the order. The dialogue felt like how people would summarize a conversation. That's kind of my thought. Like it felt very curt. It did not, which I know like this omniscient point of view, I believe is not supposed to be entirely reliable. Like it's supposed to be a mix of like what actually happened and maybe like partially people being more like the legends. But I will say, I don't think it's how people talk for a lot of the interactions. And I don't think this isn't like there's some authors where it's like, you know, there'll be a fantasy world and they'll have a modern style, and it's like it is how people talk, it's just not the style you associate with that setting. This one, just for how abridged and almost like how efficiently information is communicated, I don't think that's how efficient information is actually basically ever communicated, and it is not the style of dialogue I prefer. I definitely prefer like the style of dialogue that is less about showing what information is conveyed and more about like showing things about the characters involved, which I still thought the characterization was good, but this would definitely like, if I were to say, if you could like change one thing to make this more likely to be a 5-star read for me, it would be changing the style of the dialogue. One other thing is which this might be because I'm slightly more optimistic about humanity, but I mean, I feel like, you know, for people who've read this book, compare the frequency of moderately non-moronic people in real life to in this book. Like, a lot of the time you'll get in someone's head, like, rulers, and they're just so stupid. Like, the omniscient, like, thing will quickly go through, like, all the mistakes they made, which, even if you go to, like, some of the considered, like, worst rulers in history, you can usually be like, yeah, that was dumb, but, like, this is probably what they were thinking. A lot of the characters in this were, like, in my opinion, like, relative to what I think, like, overly petty, overly cruel, overly presumptuous, and just overly stupid. And there were smart, caring characters, but it felt like they were, like, all in one location. And there were people who were smart, who were still, like, dicks. But I felt like it did make it... So this is a sweeping epic that shows, like, every side for the story. And, like, the characters we're cheering for are not, like, moral paragons. Like, they're clearly imperfect. But it felt like there was basically no way any at all reasonable human could make a case for any of the antagonists. Like, they felt... To me, they were a bit much. And then I got one more, And this, I think, is partially because, like, the omniscient narrator is slightly unreliable. Because I will say there's a number of battles in this book. If you like battles, I don't even know how many battles this book has, but it's a lot. And a lot of the battles are really good. There's some really clever tactics. I found at times there were a couple battles where it was like, it looked like one side should clearly win, and then the other side had like one clever tactic to give them an advantage, which led to an immediate, decisive victory. And I think a couple times the level of effectiveness was not justified for like what they did. And I think there are a couple battles where it's not adequately justified why that result happened. Now, I think it's very possible that this is because it is like a combination of the myths. So actually, like, if it starts and it's like, oh, the numbers are like 3,000 to 30,000, it's actually like the reliable narrator would be like, oh, you know, the numbers were like 3,000 to 9,000. This is something people are very suspicious when they look at like historians. Like, Caesar has a battle with Pompey where he claims he was outnumbered by like a ton, and then he claims he lost like 300 people, and Pompey lost like 36,000, and people are just like, that's not plausible, Caesar. Like, come on. And I could see it being something that going on, but I do think there are some military results where I felt the result was not sufficiently justified. Okay, those are the things that stopped it from being a 5 stars. I will now return to say that none of these are significant issues. I still think it's extremely solid at characterization, plot, and world building especially. The plot is intricate. Like the plotting of this book is pretty exquisite for how much time it makes, how much sense and like how logical it typically is, how I think basically every part of this novel felt important, and like it's not, I don't think it's easy to have this much stuff happen in a book. Like, I think if most people tried to write a book where this much stuff happened, they just wouldn't get a coherent story out of it. And it took a lot of skill from Ken Liu to have this much stuff happen, and for it to be engaging, and for the stuff to be interesting, and to have me emotionally invested. And like, yeah, it was a really impressive book that is like the most, like, this is definitely a 4-star book. Like, I'm definitely not giving it 5. It has things that I talked about that hold me back from giving it 5. But it's also, like, I'm definitely not giving it 3. Because, I mean, as I said, like, there were at points where, like, you know, I was enough invested that it was like, who knows what time it is, because I was just reading. While also being, like, I think having a lot of depth. Anyway, that is my review for The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu, the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty. I will be talking about it with spoilers with Jimmy Nuts. I believe that's going to be on October 6th in like the afternoon, in the evening, my time. That's going to be live. There will be a live chat, so if you want, you can ask questions. If you are someone with a channel participating in this read-along, I might, I have 4 people lined up for like each book. I might also try and, like, if you're participating, like, get an extra person, or I might even not do that. I might get an extra person. So if you are a channel and I haven't talked to you, and you're like, hey, can I participate in one of these live shows? Whether it be, everyone wants to do Wall of Storms, because everyone's favorite is Wall of Storms. But especially if you want to do Grace of Kings, or if you want to do any of them, let me know. And then I think I might at the end do, like, try and get as many people as I can, like, all in one. Right now, the people I have lined up is Jimmy from the Fantasy Network for Grace of Kings. And I picked the people based on, like, who I thought I'd have the most to talk about. And I actually just thought, like, Jimmy, for his thoughts on it. Like, I remember when he was talking about Grace of Kings, like, thought I'd be interested to hear what he had to say and to chat with him about it. And then I have RJ, the 36-foot man, who's actually taller than Mata, for Wall of Storms, which I believe might be his favorite book of all time. And then for Veiled Throne, I have Bookborn, is the person I last talked to who agreed, and this is, it's everyone's least favorite. So someone had to get Veiled Throne, and this is partially revenge because she's had me on for one live show ever, which was Best Served Cold. Come on. So we had to get her on for her least favorite. And then for Speaking Bones, I have Kyle from Read by Kyle. And I have him on because halfway through Speaking Bones, like, the way he was talking about it, I thought it was going to be like a 3.5 star. And then he ended up giving it like 10 out of 10. And I just want to know how that happened. So, yeah. One person I might reach out to Petrick, because I know he's, since I planned the read-along, I've gone through the entire series, never collabed with Petrick. Books Rebound was in the discussion. I might have him on for one of them. Ponderings with Pete. I think I'll talk to in my sprint with Alan. He might hop on for Veiled Throne as well with Bookborn. Yeah. So that's the plan. Let me know if you'd be interested in that. Hope you enjoyed the review. Hopefully this was coherent and helped you decide, if this would be a book for you. Have a nice day, everyone.